Yes, I'm here with Dr. Nessa O'Connor, who's come from the National Museum to talk to us today at the Celtic Fringe on the Spanish Armada on her time spent excavating the wreck back in 1985. Nessa, what would you say was the most memorable recollection you have of that particular undertaking?
Well, my particular memory of that September day in 1985 was a very short journey by inflatable dinghy out to the site of the Juliana and going backwards off the boat into the water and very, very quickly coming down onto the wreck of the Juliana and seeing the extensive remains of the rudder, first of all, then a cannon, then a gun carriage as well.
And what's it like being an underwater archaeologist, discovering something as momentous as that for the first time? What sort of ideas and thoughts flow through your mind?
Well, every discovery is different, but as a state-employed archaeologist, we tend to come along after somebody else has found something rather than actually making the initial discovery ourselves. But that doesn't take from the wonder or the excitement of it. In 1985, I wasn't all that very long working in the National Museum, and it was my first major project as a trained scuba diver and just taking my first steps in underwater archaeology. So you could hardly have imagined something more exciting than the discovery of 3 wrecks of the one squadron from the Spanish Armada within a very short distance of each other in Straffan Bay.
And did you have a personal investment or interest in the Armada and in particular the wrecks off the coast of Ireland, or was it just a kind of a part of your job?
Well, I suppose it would have been, in the first instance, a part of my job because, you know, as a public servant working in the National Museum, you just go, you respond to the reports that are made to you, and that could be somebody finding an early Bronze Age cyst burial in farmland in the Irish Midlands, or it could have been a discovery in the lakes or the rivers. I mean, we would have done underwater archaeological work there as well. I would have been aware of earlier discoveries like the Trinidad Valancera and the Girona off the coast of County Antrim and my own county Kerry, the Santa Maria della Rosa in Blasket Sound. But I had never before been up close, so to speak, or seen the remains of an Armada wreck on the seabed.
Mm-hmm. And what for you was the most significant find on that dive off the coast of Sligo and Streaja?
Well, I suppose the rudder would have been the most unique discovery. I mean, there were other cannon from other wrecks, but I suppose our perspective as archaeologists is that even with a type of object of which there have been many recorded previously or many in museum collections, that every one is unique. So every single object, whether it's from an underwater context or from dry land, is unique. It might be the first one from a particular site or a particular wreck, but in terms of uniqueness, probably the rudder was the most exciting for the pure extent of it and the amount of detail, the iron fastenings, all that, you know.
Yes. And in terms of your own participation in, for instance, the identification of a particular artefact to it ending up on display in the National Museum, what sort of role and function would you ordinarily take in that process?
Well, in reality, most of my work is office-based now. I don't, you know, I'm still involved in underwater archaeology, but not on a site basis because there's now an underwater archaeology unit. And while I was a trained diver, I was trained in the code of sports diving. I never had any commercial dive training. So most of my work now is in the National Museum in Kildare Street, a certain amount of field work, but anyone who finds an archaeological object in Ireland, they have to report it to the National Museum, and the vast majority of people do anyway because they have an interest in their own heritage. So the museum's function and my function would begin from the moment you answer the telephone to someone reporting a find. You take all the details, send them out a standard report of discovery form, ask them to mark the location on the map, and in a lot of instances we would go out and look at find locations to see if there's any other evidence, archaeological evidence to be recorded.
Great. Now, do you think there's a case to revisit Streaja and to, you know, reenact or to in some way continue the excavation process?
Well, I think there's a need for a number of different things to happen at Streaja, and some of that has been happening already. some of that has been happening already in that there's ongoing monitoring of the site by the Underwater Archaeology Unit of the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and that has included geophysical survey which has been carried out this year, and there has been some monitoring diving as well, and also the local dive club in Sligo is assisting in that they dive under licence every now and then as well. And the evidence of the past number of years has been that the sites are covered, but there has been detailed geophysical survey this year, and the unit are hoping to actually dive the sites in the coming year, in 2015.
And one final question, is it resource intensive? Is it expensive to initiate a dive along the lines that we're talking about?
Well, it's not so much the diving is so very expensive. For the state, the underwater unit, I mean, they're employed anyway, but the geophysical survey equipment does not belong, there isn't any high-tech geophysical survey equipment belonging to the state, so that involves hiring in personnel and hiring in equipment, but it is by no means the most expensive thing. The really resource-intensive aspect is the conservation and everything that happens after material is raised from the wrecks.
And would you like to see more work undertaken in that strategy?
Well, it would be wonderful if the resources are available, but it's complicated. You can't easily just lift one cannon, because there's always an assumption that if you lift something, you may dislodge sections of the wreck, and it's very hard to judge that in advance. So it can be difficult to just choose one object and be confident that you're only going to disturb that and not maybe some other major part of the site as well in the process. So you need to be sure that you're fully resourced to do whatever you set out to do, and the consequences of disturbing more of the site as well. But yes, it would be wonderful if all the resources were there, and we live in hope.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nessa.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
that.